All right, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone of the last lecture in 1 week from tonight, Thomas Pfeiffer, and also anyone who wants AIA credits, continuing education credits, you can just approach me or email me is fine. And so to give the introduction, I'm going to invite up Robert McCarter.
Good evening. I would first start off by mentioning that, or alerting you to the fact that this is the AIA St. Louis Chapter Scholarship Lecture. The St. Louis Chapter of the American Institute of Architects and the Washington University School of Architecture have been inextricably linked since the turn of the 20th century, with the AIA St. Louis providing ongoing engagement and support for well over 100 years. In recent years, the alumni and friends of the AIA St. Louis have generously supported the Sam Fox School's College of Architecture and Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Design, it's always a mouthful, including scholarship support and sponsorship of today's AIA St. Louis Scholarship Trust Lecture. We are very grateful for their engagement in the Sam Fox School community and providing the opportunity to bring outstanding professionals in our field to share their expertise with our students and community. So if I could have a round of applause. We have 2 representatives at least from the AIA, maybe more, but that is outside of our faculty, which also includes many members. It gives me a truly great pleasure to introduce Marina Tabassum, who's come to us all the way from Bangladesh. And I'm going to give just a brief overview so that she can give us a sense of her practice and some of the work. Marina Tabassum was born in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and she graduated from the Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology in 1994. Just to give you a sense of time, Khan designed the Dhaka, the national capital of Bangladesh. Well, it began as another project, ended as the national capital of Bangladesh, but it was incomplete at his death in 1974, so it wasn't completed until a number of years later. The next year after she graduated, in 1995, she established the firm Urbana with Kashef Chowdhury, and her firm won the competition for the Independence Monument and Liberation War Museum in Dhaka in 1997, and it was constructed from 1999 to 2003. To put this in some kind of perspective, this canonical work by architects that are still in their 20s should be understood, if you relate it to a country like the United States, as a kind of combination of the Independence Mall Liberty Bell building and the Washington Monument in one building in one place, as combining all of the aspects of the War of Independence as well as the establishment of the new country. As William Curtis has written very beautifully, I think, about this monument, quote, "This is a remarkable achievement by any standard, an articulate public building, in fact, a symbolic landscape, which responds to the collective memory with gravitas and dignity. The complex establishes a restrained monumentality. There's a ritual journey through subterranean spaces of shadow, re-emerging before the vertical shaft of glass bricks that seem to solidify light and to express hope in the future," end quote. Tabassum founded her Dhaka-based Marina Tabassum Architects in 2005. And in her work, which she will introduce this evening, Tabassum seeks to construct architecture that is contemporary yet reflectively rooted in its place and engaged with ecological aspects of climate, context, culture, and history. In this, it's important to note that Bangladesh is the world's largest and most volatile river delta, subjected to annual inundations of the monsoon season, which has been inhabited continuously by millions of people for thousands of years. Tabassum has been visiting professor at Harvard University, Technical University Delft, Technical University Munich, and the University of Texas, and the Bengal Institute, among others. Her awards include an honorary degree from TU Munich in 2020, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in 2016, which is given to the best buildings in the Islamic world, as chosen by the jury, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award here in the US in 2020, the gold medal from the French Academy of Architecture 2021, also 2021, I believe the Arnold Brunner Award from the New York AIA, the Soane Medal in Architecture from the United Kingdom, named after John Soane, of course, also 2021. Her work was presented in the Venice Biennale in 2018, and she won the Jamil Prize also in 2018. In 2019, she was the Kenneth Frampton Endowed Lecturer at Columbia University, which is a lecture series that's actually selected by Frampton, one person each year. And of course, Frampton, as you know, was recently here in the fall. Tabassum was named the third of the top 10 thinkers of the COVID-19 era by Prospect Magazine in the United Kingdom in 2020, and this is for her ability to combine in her thinking the global climate and local culture issues. In parallel with her practice, Tabassum is a member of the steering committee of the Aga Khan Awards for Architecture. She heads the Foundation for Architecture and Community Equity, which focuses on the environment and climate preparedness. And she chairs the board of ProCreatTech, a fair trade organization that ensures the livelihood of thousands of women artisans in Bangladesh. Her portfolio of work is extensive and widely recognized. Tabassum's practice is actually consciously relatively modest in size. We were talking about this at lunch. Taking on a limited number of projects each year with a kind of focused notion of what is to be achieved. This approach has led to a series of projects of the highest quality and greatest relevance for the neighborhoods in which they are built. Tabassum is one of the 10 contemporary architects my seminar students are studying this semester in parallel to the works of Louis Kahn, including his magnum opus, as I mentioned, the Bangladesh National Capital. Please join me in welcoming one of the very best world architects practicing today, Marina Tabassum.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you all for being here today. You know, this invitation was extended to me by Robert in 2019 or 2020 actually. So we were planning, and then of course COVID hit, and then the option was whether to do it virtually by Zoom or to wait. So I said, you know, let's wait. It's better to look at the faces of the students and then to give a talk. You know, it's so much more personal and close, so we opted to wait out. So here I am finally in St. Louis for the very first time. So basically I decided to sort of start with the projects that we've been doing in the last 2 years. Since the pandemic hit, I think these are the two major realities that has been, you know, completely kept us busy in this last few years. So yeah, the pandemic and of course the global warming, and in many ways, I think it made us all think twice, thrice about the realities we're living through, and you know how we should be living in the future. And so basically, I think it needs to shift from human to more about the environment and nature. And so in a way, to reimagine architecture, reimagine the way we practice and live our lives. More importantly so, because the place I come from, which is Bangladesh, is one of the most vulnerable to the climate change, and especially the sea level rise. As you know, sea level rise doesn't happen the same way everywhere around the world. With the temperature rise, the current in the Indian Ocean is changing, and because of that, we already see the the rise of the sea level, which, as you can see, within maybe 15 to 25 years, we are expecting about a 1 meter sea level rise. So just to give you an idea about Bangladesh and, in a way, where I come from, if you look at this map, basically Bangladesh is in the foothills of the Himalayas. That's where it's located. As you can see, those snow mountains are the Himalayan range. And from the Himalayas, there's these two major rivers that come out. One is the Ganges and the other one is the Brahmaputra. And these two rivers, also another river, which is the Meghna, converges into the Bay of Bengal, flushes onto the Bay of Bengal. And while doing so, accumulating silt and creating this land, which is the political boundary of Bangladesh, 2/3 of our landmass is actually delta. So this is the Ganges Delta, which is actually the largest delta in the world and home to 150 million people. So it's a huge population. And if you see the map on the other side, which actually shows all the water bodies that we have. So we have about 700 rivers and all different kind of wetlands and lakes and canals. So it's more of a waterscape than a landscape, actually. So everything around of our life is very much focused around water. This is about a NASA image of 20 years, and you can see how the rivers actually shapes and reshapes by themselves. And it's a huge amount of water that flows through the land. And as it does, it basically erodes the banks when the river changes its courses, and new landmass forms within the bed of the river, which is actually the sand beds, which are known in our own local language as jor. So what you see here, when you see it on ground, basically this is what happens when we have the summer months. There is an enormous current of water that comes through, and what happens is that these are such fragile, soft soil, because it's all alluvium, basically crushes it down. So there is glacial water coming down from the Himalayas and also monsoon water. So it's an enormous current that actually takes down, and it has taken down many small towns, villages, washed away many of these things. And what has happened is has basically rendered a lot of people homeless, landless. Villages have been washed away. So there is an enormous amount of population who has lost their home, lost their land. So quite often moving to the cities or becoming migrants. And because of the sea level rise, this has become a much more pressing issue, that where you see a lot of people moving. So there are climate migrants of an enormous number that is there. And on the other hand, as I was mentioning, that we also have these sand beds emerging in the middle of the rivers. So these are what we call chor in our local language. And these are basically sand bed, as you can see here. This was a research that we did in the coastal area, around the coastal area of Bangladesh, where we tried to understand the land and the geoformation and how this entire thing happens. And if I go a little bit further, so this is actually a map showing how the Brahmaputra River actually changed its course during one large earthquake, which is the Assam earthquake that happened in the 1950s. And it actually shifted and changed the course of the river to down here, as you can see. And so this river and the other Ganges basically combined this force, and this entire land erosion became a much more important element in the entire landscape. So, and then during the dry season, which is our winter, because it's a tide-dominated delta, because of the tidal flow, what happens is the water goes back into the channel and the systems. That's why it creates this kind of a sedimentation. And so this sedimentation and the erosion is an interesting phenomena in the Ganges Delta. So what we did through our research was we were trying to trace these villages or people, how they have moved. So when they move, basically the entire village moves from one location to another location. So one village may have shifted maybe 3 to 4 times because of the movement of the rivers. And so when the villages move, the entire village, including their bazaars and their administration and everything, moves actually from one location to another. So we try to trace some of these events. And what is quite interesting is that when you look at the vernaculars around these areas, especially all along the Brahmaputra River, you'll see that there are these flat pack housing systems, which is quite unique, where there is this wooden frame structure, and then there is these corrugated sheet facades, which in the event of this land erosion, people generally take them down very quickly, within 2 hours' time, and then put it on a boat or a cart and move it to a safer location where they can find a place to rebuild. So before IKEA even thought of flat pack system, we had it like more than 100 years ago, where you can find these houses. So this was a research that was commissioned by Sharjah Architecture Triennial, and it was basically looking into the inheritance of the inheritance law and the precariousness of this land formation, and how the rights of the future generation is being ensured. So we did that, and for that reason, we decided to buy one of these houses. So that's a market where you can buy these houses, actually. So we bought 3 houses, and we shipped it to Sharjah, where we then showcased our entire research. So that's the house in its own location. That's where you see. And this is a courtyard that we were given in Sharjah, in the venue, which is an abandoned school. So we placed it there, as you can see here. So we bought 3 houses. One is a 2-story house. You can buy 2-story houses. You can add verandas to them. So they're really beautiful structures in a way. So we bought 3 houses, and we actually, so you can see this is the Sharjah city, and in the middle of the courtyard, we see Bangladeshi flat pack houses in the middle. So here it is. So what we did is, inside the house, we basically had our entire research printed on canvas or cloth, and then it was hanged so everybody could understand and see what we were trying to find out. So these are some of the images. So during the pandemic of 2020, while all our office works were pretty much stopped, and we were in our homes trying to figure out how to do and what to do, we thought that we could, further this research that we were doing and try to create something which would be a house form for the landless people who move from one sandbed to another sandbed. And so what we tried to do is we created this modular structure, which is a modular mobile house, which has basically a space frame structure, as you can see, in the middle, which is actually made out of bamboo. And we have steel joints as connectors or joints. So the entire space frame structure is created with bamboo and steel joints. It doesn't require a lot of foundation, could be just a few bricks or not. I mean, you can just, all you need is to anchor it to the ground so that it doesn't fly away during the thunderstorms. And to use whatever material you have to create a house. So basically, the first house that we built, which is in Dhaka, so these are some of the renderings that we created to show how the landless, homeless people could actually occupy these structures. So during the flooding season, they could also occupy the upper deck. It's a 2-story structure, and the lower level could be a place where they generally, use it for the daily life. So this is the first structure we built in Dhaka. So it was a prototypical structure built by 2 architects from our office, and it cost us about $200. So it's a mobile modular structure, easy to build. 2 or 3 people can build it or take it down. So this is something we tried to create, and so we built it with $200. And then after that, we decided that we need to take it to the real ground to see how and what it works. So you see that's one of the locations on top, the Google image that shows. So from Dhaka, you need to take a locally made boat like that in the middle, the aerodynamic shaped boat. And so that's a one-night journey. And then you go to the mainland, and from the mainland, you take a smaller boat to go to the shores. And that's actually in the middle of the river that you see these sandbeds that generally emerges. And that's one of the sandbed while you're approaching the site. So this is one of those sandbeds, what we call chor. So Chor Hijla, that's the name. And you can see in the horizon, that's the actual river. So you can imagine the extent and the scale of the river that is like, let's say, Meghna. So this is the lower Meghna River. So we've tried out these structures here. So this is one of our sites. And you can see how people generally live in these chores is that they have their houses, and around the house, but they basically have their farmland where they do the farming. So every house is separate. They're not really living in a cluster, but more in a sporadic way. And so the first house that we built was this one. Here it's a small family of one child and a husband and a wife. We built it for them just to understand how things work. We actually, it's a complete process the way we generally do it. Connecting with the people, asking them if they're interested in it, and they also take part as a part of equity so that there is a sense of ownership. So that's the house, and that's a toilet that we built for them. And that's the original house that they generally have to live. So that's one of the images. And the facade that you see are tall grass. We source it from the location. So this is just grass, and then taken and made into facade. So generally, most of the elements are sourced from the location, except for the steel joints, which we carry with us, and at times the bamboo, if it's not there. So this is the second location of another house. Here, the family is a little bit bigger, so we give them 2 modules. So you can have 2 modules, you can add 3 modules. The larger you want, the bigger you can make it. So this is the second house, which has 2-module house, and this is what it is. The idea is that the lower level could also be, you can also have a facade around the lower level, which generally what people do is they take the facades from the older house, and they redo it. So this is the ground level, as you see, before they had the facade on. And that's the upper deck for the family to live, mostly sleep at night. So it's all done by the architects of our office. So architects go there on site. You can imagine there's nothing, no electricity, no running water. They stay in tents, and they basically take part and make these structures. So these are all the architects who are working on site, also helping with the children. There's no school there. So it's a kind of a project that we do for the locals, in a kind of a climate preparedness manner. We are now at the moment building more than 100 houses in different parts in Bangladesh using this similar kind of a structural idea. So that's one of these structures. What happened is once we designed or devised this idea of building with bamboo and steel joints, this idea then also we used while we were working in the Rohingya refugee camp. So we have about 8 projects that we are doing in the refugee camp in Bangladesh. As you know, that Bangladesh hosts more than 1 million refugees in the Myanmar border, where we have the Rohingya refugees coming in. So some of our projects also deal with these kind of structures where we are not allowed to build anything with permanent material, so it has to be temporary structures. So there, I think this idea of our brick and, our bamboo and steel joint came very handy for us. And as you can see, so the steel joints over there. So it's basically the structure, which also has 2 stories. This is a building which we designed as an aggregation center for women farmers. So this is for the host community. So the refugees are there, and the refugees, when they came in, what happened is the locals lost their livelihood because those were farmland, and they could not do their farming anymore because this was occupied by the refugees. So there are a lot of the UN agencies. We're working with WFP, actually, World Food Program, where they have these women farmers who actually do their own farming and brings these to the aggregation center, which is one of these. This is one of the aggregation centers. These women that you see are all women farmers. So it's their building. So we had connection and talking with them, basically conversations and connections, and we kind of built these structures for them. So we have built about 2 prototypical structures, which are these aggregation centers. So this was just finished very soon. We're yet to take a good photograph. So this is one of the aggregation centers that is occupied. So this is more on the outside where they bring in their vegetables and fresh produce and sell. This is the lower level, and there is an upper deck on top, all built with bamboo, and we just have a foundation made out of brick. So here you see how the spaces are occupied by women, and they sell their produce. This is the upper deck, where generally the upper deck is more for women to, after they've done their work, they can come up and have a space for them to relax, or they can. It's more for the women to come and occupy, actually. Some of the details, as you can see. So it's a natural material, but we try to give it as much architectural identity as possible. So all different kind of details, as you can see, made out of bamboo. The point is that material can never be a limitation. It can turn into anything you like. So that's what it is. So basically what we do is, this is a process. We engage with the women, we call them clients. So it's their building. We get engaged with them. They start to draw. They kind of give us the idea what they want. So it's basically creating a program, sitting with the women, and finalizing it. And then we also have other workshops where we have these hands-on building workshops where we try to also engage the local builders to come and understand the whole process and how to build it. So you see there, they're making the model of this structure, which is the one that we have been using in the chore areas for the modular structure. So here, while we were working in the refugee camp, we needed a place to stay, so we built a house for ourselves with the same technique as I showed you earlier. So that's the same technique we used for our own house, which is where we generally stay when we go in the refugee camps. It's right up outside the refugee camp. So that's our house, which is it's a beautiful forest, actually. It was a forest, which was then taken down for making space for refugees. So that's our house. That's also, again, that same structure that I showed you earlier in the chores that we give to the people. So this is about a 3-module structure made out of bamboo, again. So there's a stair that goes up. The upper deck is where we actually sleep at night. And this is a place where we generally sit together, conversation. The upper deck is where we sleep. And so this is our place to stay while we were working, where we work in the refugee camps. Made out of bamboo, which is a locally available material. That's our team of architects who actually work in that area. Just to go a little bit further with this vernacular architecture, which actually, this was probably the first project where I started looking into vernacular, is a resort that I was commissioned in 2013. And when I went to visit the site, this was the first time I ever actually went outside of in Dhaka, where I'm born and brought up. I've been to the villages as a tourist, but not really went there to connect with the place and the people. So that was the first time when I went there. And you can see that how symbiotic a relationship people generally have when they live in the villages, where everything is sourced from the location. So this is the southern part of Bangladesh, which is the mangrove forest, the largest mangrove forest in the world. And this is occupied by, the Royal Bengal tigers it's home to Royal Bengal tigers. And right very close to that, I had this site where we were building. And, this is also, again, under threat from the sea level rise. So this is our site, right there in the middle of the river. As you can see, there are two rivers coming from both sides. So that was our site, actually, for this project. And from this Google image, you can see that it's an absolutely green landscape, kind of farmland, this fertile ground of the delta, which is there. And that's our site, absolutely at the end. That's the river, Kopotakko, that's the name of the river. So once I went there to the site and saw it, the first thing that reminded me is that, am I really equipped as an architect to build anything in a landscape which hasn't been touched by architects at all? How am I, as an architect, actually come here and build something? So this was what I kind of had in mind, that it feels like a crime to invade this silence with the roaring noise of architecture. So the idea was then for us to learn from the land how people generally build, how do they really recreate. So one of the major ideas building in the landscape, which is absolutely flat, like a delta, is to do a dig and mound process. If you see the section, so the first act of building is landscape, where you actually dig a hole or dig a pond, and you take the earth, you create a mound, and on the mound you generally place the houses. So basically when it rains, the mound then takes the water, puts it into the pond, which is then used by the locals throughout the day. So you can see above here, you see every household, which is these homesteads, have a pond right next to it. So this is a very unique, very simple idea, but works. And in the villages, a household would have a program like this, where you have rooms where people generally stay, rooms for all the different domestic animals, kitchen and everything, and all these elements of a household is then placed around a courtyard, and these courtyards of each and every house is very nicely connected with each other. So it's a very communal, social way of living life where every household is connected through courtyards. And that's how the entire village is built. So we documented these villages surrounding the site. So this is one of the villages, which is the weavers. This is the potter's village. And it has a certain way of forming because of the skill and the pottery that they produce. This is the weaver's village, who works with bamboo weaving. So you can see the way they have created their villages also. So we kind of tried to understand how people live, how do they create their social interactions. This is one of the household and the homesteads, just trying to understand how this is. And we also looked into the way they build their houses and the connections that they have created, all the materials that they use, the details they have done. So that's our site. We have a road connection, and we have this waterway also, so we try to navigate around it. What I tried to do is we basically created a master plan of the site, so where we want the houses to be. We created certain details about the huts that we want, because we wanted to create that similar kind of a village-like atmosphere. So these are thick mud houses, mud walls, and thatch roof. And the idea was to also have this courtyard-like feeling while everybody's living in these smaller huts. And the other thing what we did is we actually brought in all the villagers who actually build the houses to come and build with us. So we created the master plan, and the rest of it was done by the villagers. So what it did was it created a local economy. Instead of bringing in contractors from outside, we sourced the locals and gave them a sense of understanding and the pride. So also engaging younger generation who generally goes off to the cities looking for a job because there is no pride in living in the villages anymore. So we brought them in also to work with us. So we basically used sun-dried mud bricks and mud mortar to build our walls and thatching. And this is a very unique roof form in Bengal where you see that the pitched roof is actually curved. And this is because of the material that generally is used. So that's one of our older architecture. This above in the middle, you see from the Mughal dynasty. This is from Akbar's in the fort of Delhi and fort in Lahore. You'll see this form which was taken from Bengal. So this is a roof which is quite unique of Bengal, which is known as the Bangla roof. And the word Banglo comes from the Bangla. So basically, that's also something interesting. So we brought in some of these thatch workers to come and build it for us. We have women who does the best plaster, mud plasters. So there are a lot of women working on the side. So from the riverside, this is actually the elevation that you see. So that's our site and the elevation, the organic gardens. So entire structures were built by the locals and the people from that area. So when I was doing this project in 2013 onwards, I was really scared, thinking that this was quite a challenge because this is a new material, new territory, and whether this is architecture or not, will I be, criticized for doing something like that? But for that site, for that very time, for me, that seemed to be the right way of addressing it. So, yeah, so it's very vernacular, and probably the first project that I ever worked on in that sense. So what happened is we also have had this connection with the villagers that was created. And we started also then after the project was finished, we looked into how they live their life and how we can improve their way of life and living. And so we created this thing called Ponygram Community Initiative. Ponygram is the name of the resort. So this community initiative, through that we created craft diversification workshops. We brought in product designers and gave them new ideas about crafting. We created these savings groups where they actually can save money every week. Each one of them save about $1, which now has accumulated to a large sum of fund, which now they have a bank account. And the idea is that with a large amount of money, they can actually loan themselves based on the need, and they can sort of a cooperative run it. It's a way of looking into the microcredit system, which has actually created a huge difficulty for the local Bangladeshis. A lot of people has become, I call it microcredit migrants, because they cannot pay the loan because it's a compound interest and it builds up. So they have to leave their home and go to the city looking for a job to be able to pay back the loan. Here, as a cooperative, they can save their own money, and with a simple interest, they can actually repay the loan within 5 to 8 years' time. So that's, again, another system. And the way we generally do is we also do the mapping as a process of community engagement so that they understand their own location and everything. So this is a project which is a $1,500 home project in Zhinjda, which is about an hour's drive from the resort. And this is by one of the architects, Hasibul Kobir, who lives there. And he created this idea of savings group and also made this house. So with $1,500, you can actually have a 2-bedroom and a bathroom. And that actually also, the idea that gave rise to my studio when I was teaching at GSD as an option studio to design $2,000 home. So the students were given the responsibility of designing $2,000 home projects, which the students came in to Bangladesh. They went and saw the $1,500 homes and to understand what are the materials that are available that they could use and the value of $2,000 in a location like Bangladesh and what are the possibilities. So basically the students engaged with the local clients. We had 5 different clients, And so this is one of the families. So they engaged in a process of co-creation. So it's a process of co-creation where both the client and the architect work together to create a design and an idea. So the client's idea or aspiration is absolutely key. You have to listen to that and to design it based on that. So here, as you can see, the students talking to the clients, the review, and also then we had an exhibition on site to show the villagers what the students have come up with as an idea. So this is a book report that was produced by Harvard GSD on the work that we did. So here's some of the student works where they tried out different materials and whatever was available locally to give an idea. Just showing the student works so that, yeah. I'm not going to go into details of that, but just to give you an idea. This is also something that gave rise to my Venice Biennale project, which I called Wisdom of the Land, because there's so much wisdom of living symbiotically with nature that I thought this could be an interesting way of representing what Shelley and Yvonne called free space. And free space, essentially, to me, is a Bengali courtyard where everybody's welcome. It's a place where life is lived in a theatrical manner out in the open. So we were given a site which is right here, where you can see Wisdom of the Land written. It's in the art here in this artillery. So that's our plan. That's the site, as you can see. What we did is we tried to create a Bengali courtyard in Venice. And what we did was we asked the villagers to give us some of their household elements, which we could take so that we can create this courtyard-like effect. And here, as you can see, these are granaries, which still women build with mud. So this is a granary. So all these different elements, and these are the people from whom we took these elements of household, regular use utensils and things like that. And we kind of created an ensemble in Venice, kind of a collage of all these elements which are entirely sourced from nature. And the courtyard has these houses which are absolutely made out of in line. So it's a kind of an installation and representing the courtyard. Right, so, okay, so that's my projects from the villages. The Tropic of Cancer basically cuts through Bangladesh in the middle, as you can see right here. That's Bangladesh. And because of that reason, we have a very subtropical climate where we have half the year a hot, humid climate, and half the year we have about dry, cooler temperature. And even though we have a hot summer month, but the temperature never goes below 30 degrees centigrade. I don't know what's that in Fahrenheit. But yeah, so basically, which is not really a lot extreme. It's not really extreme. So in that sense, to build anything in Bangladesh in terms of architecture, all you need is a plinth to keep you above the water, which is because we have monsoon. So create a plinth, 4 columns, and a roof to save you from the elements. And that's what it is. That's all you need. There is no insulation, nothing whatsoever to make architecture. So that's really an advantage in many ways. And this is one of the first, let's say, the modern architecture in Bangladesh from 1953, designed by Mazhar al-Islam, our first architect of Bangladesh. And there, I think this whole idea of a tropical modernity was already introduced in the 50s. So we kind of had to just build upon it. And one of our very first projects, which is an apartment that we designed, kind of addressed that idea of tropical modernity, where we tried to open up the facades to create that openness, or let's say the blurring the edge between inside and outside, which is a possibility in our kind of climate. That's an open court to bring in the nature, the rain and water, to celebrate nature in a way. So that's a court. And because of this climate where you have hot summer month, but with the humidity, it's always important for the buildings to breathe. So, when I was designing one apartment building, which is a 12-story residential block, the only developer-built project that I have done ever. so where I tried to address this whole idea of how you can open up and create this wind flow or airflow that really is an absolute necessity when you live in a tropical climate. And this is also, this building is also on this very north-south spine of the city of Dhaka. So I didn't want to create anything like a balcony where you see clothes hanging. It needed to give a city facade, so that's why the building is also helping in both ways. It gives the city a facade, but at the same time it also helps the building to ventilate itself. So there you can see the building in its own. So this is a very busy road and remains jammed throughout the day quite often. We have about 20 million people living in the city of Dhaka, so you can imagine the traffic and the flow. So I think in many ways, in many of the projects, I try to readdress these issues of climate where we had these houses there that used to have these long verandas, which was used as a buffer to condition the air or to bring in light and ventilation. So in many of our projects, we try to address that by this is a project where we try to wrap it around the building to create that kind of a space, also create that buffer, and having these courtyards in the middle. Courtyards are absolute essential for us because it creates this stack effect where air can come in and can be, hot air goes up and new fresh air comes in. So basically it also creates that movement of airflow and circulation, which is so necessary. So that's the only thing we need to ensure, that your building must breathe, your building must be circulating with fresh air. And in a passive manner, that's probably also one of the major things to work with. So many of our projects address this idea of having a court or an atrium to help that process. So this is again one of the buildings that I designed. This was a French-German embassy building, which we won in as a competition, but later on it didn't get built. There was a French architect who was commissioned. So it was a really sad story for me. So anyway, this is again another small project which has again the same atrium idea in the middle, and we have courts on the sides, pavilions on the upper deck. So embracing the climate and living naturally is something that I really always try to address in most of my works. This is one of our monasteries, the Buddhist Monastery. We have several Buddhist monasteries in Bangladesh, and this is from the 2nd, 3rd century BC onwards. So you see this is built with brick. That's our only material we have, actually. I mean, whenever there was a need for permanence, people generally took earth, baked it into brick, and built something. So most of the time you see all the architectural projects which are about religious structures, about palaces, and anything about power, be it religious, cultural, political, was that sought permanence, always used brick. Otherwise, people generally, let's say, architecture of people, which is the vernacular, was always with mud. So it was mud and brick. That's the only thing we have. We have no stone in our delta. So you see that we have these beautiful terracotta temples from the Hindu dynasties, and they're all intricately curved with, it's basically earth and turned into such beautiful structures. And so brick is our material, actually. We have really good brick masons who build with brick, and we have them really, everywhere around. Handcrafting is, again, also something very important for us. Everything is handmade. So handcrafting also is something that gives us a certain kind of a relationship that gets created with the people who work with us. A lot of artisans, craftsmen who work in many of our projects, who actually become your own family members in many ways. So basically, all these people are very close to us who work with us. So that's Dhaka city, as you can see, one of the fastest growing cities in the world, a mega city at the moment. And it's actually bounded by two rivers. A river on the south is the Buriganga, and the one on the top is Turag. But basically, the city is now going beyond the rivers also, because there is no decentralization, nothing, for whatever reason. Anything you want, you need to come to the city, so that's a problem. But that's how it is, and that's how we generally live in the entire city. Again, like many Asian cities, we have the formal and the informal, or let's say the lower income and the upper income level people living side by side in a way, in a coexisting manner. So that's the density. It's one of the densest cities in the world also, so that's our city. So one of our projects, as Robert was mentioning, is the Museum of Independence. And this is a project which we won in a competition in 1997, 2 years after our graduation. So that was, we were about 27, 28 years of age. We were the youngest of the participants in a nationwide competition. That was quite a large commission for us at that time. So the idea was that you can see the city of Dhaka, which is quite densely built, and that's actually one of the rare green park areas that's left in the city. And that was chosen as a site for a museum and the Monument of Independence of Bangladesh. So to give a little history about the site, this used to be a horse racing ground during the British colonial time. And then after the British left, the entire Indian subcontinent was divided into two countries, which was Pakistan and India. And this was done based on religion. So the Muslims became Pakistan, and the Hindu-dominated area became India. And so Pakistan had two different parts. One was the East Pakistan, and the other was the West Pakistan. West Pakistan is the now Pakistan, and the East Pakistan is actually Bangladesh. So between the East and West, there was about 1,700 kilometers of distance, which is India. And this was based on religious belief, but what they probably didn't understand, the fact that culture makes a difference. And we spoke two different languages, we ate completely different kind of food. So this was an absolutely bad marriage that was not to last for a very long time. So from 47, I think in 1971, which you see in the middle image, that's also again the same site where we had the father of the nation, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, giving this really important speech in a public address that we don't want to stay as Pakistan, we want to become free and a sovereign nation, which actually triggered a war in March, and it was a 9-month-long, really very bloody war. There was a lot of genocide and killing by the Pakistan army of the Bangladeshi, or the liberation, people who wanted liberation. And then in December the same year, the Pakistan army forces surrendered to the allied force of India and Bangladesh, and the war was over and the sovereign Bangladesh was born. So from that time, this competition came in 1997, which is about 23, 24 years of gap. But anyway, so this is what we designed and finally got built. The idea for us was, since it's a park and one of the rare last green parks that are remaining in the city, we just didn't want to go for a building. We wanted to address this as a non-building approach because it has a museum, it has research centers, it also has the Monument of Independence, everything built in. So basically we wanted to take as little as footprint as possible for the entire structure and then to place it in the park. So as you see here, it was created like a journey where you basically walk up to that plaza, which is about 5 feet high. And then it has a reflecting pool surrounding it. There are few elements on the plaza, culminating with the tower with the Independence Tower at the end. So if you look at the section here, so the entire museum was taken below grade. Here's the monument to independence. There's a wall above. And the idea for us was that there is a duality in Bangladesh's independence. The independence wasn't gained without a war, so there is a selfless sacrifice of people. So this needs to be addressed when you also address the idea of independence. So freedom, dream, aspiration has a preferred direction. It goes upwards. Anything that relates to infinite generally takes an upward leap. So the plaza was actually the place where people would congregate for celebration, whereas memory, sadness urges the subterranean. So that's why we took the idea of sadness and the loss entirely below grade. So that became the Museum of Independence. So that's our site, as you can see. The tower, the central pool, which is commemorating the idea of this 9-month-long struggle and war, has a central hole, and the entire water kind of draws into that hole. And before you go close to the tower, you actually head down to the museum. So that's the plan of the museum. There are ramps that take you down. There's an audiovisual room, and then the museum space, the central chamber, as you can see, which actually holds the water on top. And then once you finish visiting the museum, you can go up with the ramp. It's a very basic, simple idea. So the building took us 16 years to finish, actually. 16 years because of the political government changing, and then one of the government had the interest, the other one didn't. So it took a long time, and the building really struggled. So it was stopped, and it went again, it stopped. So the entire history of the building of the project is also kind of embedded in the walls, as you can see, because concrete never lies. Concrete tells the truth. So this is basically printed on glass, kind of a space, and then you enter to a place which is the dark area, holding all the images of the genocide and the killings. We had intellectual killing also in December when the war was coming to an end. All these journalists, scientists, engineers, doctors were sought out through a list and were taken and killed. So basically, an intellectual killing is kind of one of the most devastating and the worst thing that actually set Bangladesh completely apart, and took us a long time to get out of that. So this is the space in the central chamber where the water, as I was showing you, is drawing in and kind of comes down as a water column. The only source of light there is that oculus through which daylight comes in. And that space doesn't have any artificial light, so no other display also. So it's a very contemplative space, kind of where people generally would come and spend some time remembering the people who lost their lives and the sacrifice that was made to build this nation. And then you slowly go up through the ramp and then going up to the plaza, where you then face this tower, which is the Tower of Independence. For us, it was actually a tower of light. We tried to address independence or freedom with the idea of light. And how can you really, how can light be a material? So that's the reason why I used glass as a material to hold light. So what we have is a space frame structure in the middle, and then there are glass kind of stacked on top of another. So it's like a brick made out of glass. So all these glasses, I think maybe the next image would probably show you better. So this is glass not as a sheet, but as stacked one top of the other to create these panels. And then these panels are then clad onto the space frame structure. The idea was that the light would refract through the material of glass and then create this prismatic effect during the daytime. So here you can see Bangladeshis jumping in the water. And so in the night, basically it's lit from the outside, which creates this glow of light. So the idea was not really, the idea was actually a tower of light. A tower of light is a beacon of hope for a young nation. And my country is actually younger than me, 2 years younger, so that's it. So here you can see in the evening sun, it's a beautiful glowing light. Okay, so the last project, and I should be finishing very soon. So this is the blue dot that you see above is actually the space or the site for the mosque project. And this mosque is to the absolute edge, the northern edge of the city of Dhaka, because there's a river called Turag. That's the end of the city towards the north direction. The site used to be a farmland, and through a very short period of time, it has gone through changes, and it's constantly transforming from a farmland to a more of a residential settlement area. This was not part of Dhaka city when I started the project, but now it's part of Dhaka. So this was a project that was commissioned by my grandmother. There you see her, and this is the first prayer that we held under the jackfruit tree. It was still a very village-like atmosphere. You can see my grandmother sitting there. This is in September 2006. So in December 2006, the same year, a few months later, she passed away. And so it was her project. She donated the land, and she actually commissioned me to design this. So it became a responsibility for me to design and to finish her dream or the promise that I made to her. So, these are some of I really actually went through a lot of studies because, in Bangladesh, women do not go to mosques. So my memory of going to a mosque was when I was 6 years old. I went there once or twice, maybe. The quietness, the sense of spirituality, the calmness, and the coolness of the space kind of remained with me. But otherwise, I do not have any experience of going to a mosque. And in 2006, when you are designing a mosque, you can imagine 9/11 has already happened. There were wars going on. Muslims and the identity of Muslim was being questioned. So at a time like that, when you are designing a mosque, the first thing that came to mind is, what is really a mosque? So I tried to understand that, going into the history. So the first mosque of Islam was built by the Prophet himself in Medina. It was a place which was kind of a house form in Medina that was taken and elongated and created a mosque. It was a place for congregation. There was the genealogy, let's say, of a mosque is actually rooted in a house form of the Arabian Peninsula. So there was no dome, no minaret. It was a place where people would come and gather as a congregational space. It was not just a religious place, but it was used as a space for communal gatherings, social gatherings. It was also used for social, administrative, judicial activities also. So it was a lot of things in one. But as Islam flourished and went from the Arabian Peninsula towards east and towards west, it took in all the different, it adapted to the local culture and the local place. So that's why you see a mosque in Spain, in the Grand Mosque, as you can see, in a different way as you would see a mosque in Djerba or in Indian subcontinent in Delhi or in Mali, let's say. So every mosque adapted to the local culture, the local construction technique, the local material, and kind of transformed itself. In our own location in Bangladesh, the first mosques that you find, especially in the Bengal, is the mosques from the Sultanate period, which is some of these structures that you see are quite beautiful, and also takes from the same idea of building let's say a temple, you just don't see the terracotta decorations of figurative decorations, but it kind of takes the same idea of building with terracotta. And so Islam came after the Hindu dynasties, so basically taking the same structures. And this is what has happened to mosque these days in Dhaka. Stacks of floors, there is no sense of space or quality. And do you see a mosque here? So that's what happened with the symbols. So you really question, do you really need symbols to identify your religious belief or, the idea of a space of worship? And so I thought, it's better to go for spiritual spaces, and inspirational spiritual spaces for me is the Hagia Sophia, the mosque in Cordoba, that gives you that sense of infiniteness and the quality of light that is so beautiful. So that's our site. That was my first drawing of the mosque, kind of trying to retrace this idea of non-existent domes and minarets, creating that circular space. And then basically, I don't know if you know, but basically Muslims pray in a certain direction, which is the direction of Mecca. So that needed to be shifted from the city grid. So the main prayer hall makes a shift of about 12 or 13 degrees. And so that's how it is. So that's my chronological development. The site, which is a square 75 feet by 75 feet, I have a prayer hall, which is about 50 by 50. The drum that was introduced kind of helps that shift, which doesn't create those corners, as you can see. And what happens is these openings on the corners also helps for the air circulation, as I was showing you the stack effect. That also is there in the corners because it helps the draft of air to flow, and also brings in light. So those are some of our old architectural elements that you see in Bengal. And from there, this was my conceptual drawing where I kind of tried to retrace this idea of building with brick. So the central space, which is the prayer hall, is the only space where we have concrete. The rest is made out of brick. My grandmother did leave some money to build the project, but I had to source funding also from different sources. So I tried to minimize the cost as much as possible, and when you don't have concrete, it substantially reduces the cost. So that's why the entire envelope is made out of brick. So you see the prayer hall in the middle, which is actually a pavilion that I showed you earlier. It's just a pavilion on columns and just wrapped with brick all around, which actually holds all the different activities that are necessary, the ancillaries. So that's the plan. So you enter from the south side. That's the west, which is the direction of Mecca. And you're not allowed to go into the space immediately because, to condition your brain towards the act of prayer, you need to take a few bends to mentally, focus yourself out of your daily life to come into the prayer. So it required a certain bending. So that's why people enter, and then you have to come through these corners and then to enter into the main space. As I said, perforation and breathing is an important element. So I tried to create this breathing facade. It's a kind of a porous wall. So this is the mosque in its own context, where it's getting really built up all around. As you can see, at one point, I don't think you'll see the mosque anymore. So the facades are not really important. That's why, for me, it was very important to look within and not without. So this is some of the images. This is probably the only space at the end people can occupy, a little bit of a space given to people. New buildings coming up. So the colonnade from where you enter, and then you go to both directions. That's the main space, in prayer hall. Some nice light coming in. That's the open space which brings in the light and the ventilation. So I think light is probably the only ornament of the space because it's free, didn't cost me anything. Right. So I think I will finish it here. Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. Why not? Hi. Aha.
I was very impressed to see, hear when you say like the young generation involvement in this eco-resort project. Also, it's very interesting to see those ideal manner you create for this like refugees projects. I was wondering like how do we envision this the idea of human involvement, human engagement in the architecture, but also in the architectural process. And then, because it seems like a lot of your project, they're not only final buildings, but also it actually a process of building, a process of construction that invents these stories and then create a new connection between people. And another question is like, I remember in one of your interviews, you mentioned this like fluidity of the three-room house you live in your childhood with your family. I wonder about this like fluidity. Does it affect this like the multifunctionality of like human interactions in this later project? Yeah.
Well, okay, the first question was about human engagement. You know, more and more I see that as an absolute importance, especially, you know, we architects, when I started, let's say even in the 90s, mid-90s, it was, my office was still a service rendering profession where we have an office, there are clients who come in who has the ability to pay pay an architect and get them design nice buildings. And that was the kind of an idea where you have clients coming in, giving you a project, you design, you go to the client, you satisfy them, you can build it, the project is done. So basically it's a service rendering profession. But how many people do you actually address by doing that? 1%. That's it, 1% of the entire population, especially in Bangladesh, that's it. But as a profession, is that good enough, really? That was my question. And I think if you have listened to the talk, then you'll see that I talked about my father, who's a doctor, and who reaches out to a far more population than me being an architect. So how do I address these 99% others who has no knowledge that architecture exists or architects exist? So that's when, you know, when I started working in the villages, we tried to come up with this idea like, how do we introduce ourselves to people who has no knowledge, and they don't really require us anyway. But there is a lot of need because people are moving from, let's say, mud houses to brick houses. They don't have the knowledge of building with brick. Quite often they end up building something really poor and no sense of organizational quality of planning of spaces that they live in. So in a way, we introduce this idea of co-creation where we go to people, we talk to them, we engage with them. And through workshops, we have lunches, dinners together. We bring in different elements like making models, drawings, giving them all kinds of different interesting things that we work with, and really try to engage with them in every possible way, trying to understand, also giving them the understanding of what architects are, what we do, how we do it, and creating programs, working in hands-on workshops to build. So, you know, these are mechanisms where you engage people, you engage with people, and then you can build with them. And that's something, you know, all the projects that we've been working on, including the refugee camps, where we engage with the refugees actually, We have workshops with them. We try to understand, like we are designing women-friendly centers for them. What are their needs, basically? They live in these really cramped, small houses, which is dense. So then, what are the aspirations of them? So all these things matter. So when you're working with people, it's absolute necessity that you engage with them, you design with them. It's a kind of a bottom-up process that we've really tried to engage. So all our projects, especially even the 100 houses that we're building in all different locations in Bangladesh, also has to do with a similar technique of working with people. And when you work with people, it has to be a very slow process. So that's the first answer. The second question was what? I forgot. Right, yeah. Yeah, so, it's not only me. Most of our, when we grew up, every room was kind of multifunctional. There was no, what can I say? It was not assigned like a living room that you go and entertain guests only. A living room, which is by day a living room, at night would turn into a bedroom, or a place where you would have your lunches would turn into a bedroom at night. So every space was very multifunctional. That's also the case even now in many households, where you don't assign name to each rooms and it's only used for that specific purpose. For me, living room is basically a room of vanity collecting dust, waiting for someone to come. Such a waste of space. So, why not have multiple use of the spaces? That's how we can also think of as designers. So that's what I think I was mentioning. Welcome. It seems like he's the only one who studied.
So a lot of your recent work is engaging a lot of the sustainability and climate change effects, and as such, the museum too as another structural component. Do you foresee your future projects starting to engage with that as a sustainable material more, particularly in larger scale works, out of the context of these buildings?
Yeah, so, especially in the cities, it's quite difficult when you have like 5-story, 10-story, 15-story structures to build with bamboo. I haven't tried that yet. I don't know if any client would agree. But there is as I was mentioning, that there are two different aspects. One is, natural material should be tried out far more than what we generally do. And the potential of it is enormous, actually. Of course, natural meaning that it requires much more maintenance, probably needs more changing with time, and renewal is necessary at times. So those are certain things we need to slowly get used to. I do not know if I'll be able to build a 15-story residential block in Dhaka city with bamboo. I don't know yet. But what we can do is make our buildings passive, which we try to do as much as possible. I really do not think buildings should be completely dependent on artificial means to survive. You think of building as a being, and if you do that, then it definitely needs to breathe on its own. It should be able to breathe, it should be able to live on its own. So, and that's possible, that's very much possible in any kind of climate. Even in Bangladesh, we have hot summer days when you need air conditioning, and for those few days you can have air conditioning, but there are also like many more days where you don't need it at all. So why would you just make a building which is completely dependent on artificial means? So, so those are the things I would like to address when I'm working in the cities. Yeah, it's a long day, I guess.
Hi, my name is Moni. Actually, partner of me. We are in Professor Roof's seminar, and we did a research about the unity project. I have a question actually more specific about the mosque. And while doing the research, I found there you create the random holes on the roof to create the sense of the spirituality, and
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, as I said, it's a very low budget project. So I really didn't have the luxury of working with any sophisticated material. It's basically, once we had the rebars placed, we had the reinforcement placed on the roof, we had the notion of a circular idea of creating this light effect, where we basically drew the circle, and then we placed these Starbucks cups, let's say, these plastic or even cups where you have coffee. So filled it with sand, placed them randomly in a certain manner, and then cast the roof. So once the casting was done, you just take out the sand-filled cups, and then you have these nice holes. And we just placed glass on top of it so that it doesn't rain inside. So it's a very simple, very easy technique. Has no glass, circular glass or anything of that sort. You can do really simple ideas. When you have a challenge of limitation of budget, it's never really a limitation to me. I think it opens doors and windows to innovation. So think about that.
I would actually follow up on that, because I've had the pleasure of now having heard their presentation this morning of your work, and now seeing you present many of the same project. You said you chose to not use typical symbols because to some degree they degenerated, at least in your culture, well, maybe all cultures, but in terms of their meaning, especially you see the one that's glued onto the corner of the big building. It's kind of a joke almost. But when we were looking at this mosque, which is what we focused on today in the class, the use of light, you actually, I would argue, you bring back these symbols, but now they're actually somehow transformed into the experience. So the idea of the dome, which is very typical, but this has no dome, it's a flat roof.
Yeah.
But then it has this, this kind of ethereal dome that the sun makes, because it's never actually in the middle of the room, it kind of moves around.
It does, yeah.
And at the end of the day, the sort of very, considering most mosques, the extremely subtle reference to the west, it's subtle on one level, it's just a slot in the wall that lets the west light in. But on
Right.
the other hand, it's incredibly powerful because it puts you in touch with the,
Yeah,
with
the
commons,
city, yeah.
And so, in a certain way, to me, this is it's symbols that you live in, which are the kind of symbols that mean something in the sense that they activate the space. And the presence of the sun, I love the photographs of the different times of day, because I could, Ando used to take these photos of his buildings, but this is much more interesting because it's also a place of ritual, because you come to pray many times a day if you can. And then, as I understand, it's also a kind of community center also. So it's really inhabited all the time. I love the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think you're right.
Other stories about the material that you use.
Yeah.
Also there's a lot of very clever use of materials.
Yeah.
Because this floor and the bricks and
Yeah.
a number
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
In addition to just the sort of minimal use of the concrete and
Yeah.
the maximum use of the brick.
Right.
But I think that is a rare thing. I think the curved wall and the way the sun hits the curved wall is really one of the most beautiful, because the rain also falls in there.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit, so what this must be like when it's raining, with the rain kind of surrounding you, versus the kind of Pantheon effect. One of my greatest memories of the Pantheon is the oculus when it's raining. And when the rain comes down, it actually seems to pull the light down into the
Right.
Pantheon, which is exactly what happens at the Independence
Yeah.
Museum. I
Yeah.
haven't visited, but from
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I understand
Sure.
from especially your photos today.
Yeah.
And I think, it really proves that this is not about budget, this is not about, at least rich materials in the normal sense. Khan said, you don't need rich materials to
No.
build monumental buildings. You have to, it's the way you think and how you engage the craft.
Right.
It's so well represented here, I have to say, so.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.